Hello, everyone. I thought I would do a short video giving you an overview of part four of the course, which consists of reading Charles Hartshorne's Time, Death, and Eternal Life, and back to Hans Jonas, who we're familiar with his essay, Immortality and the Modern Temper. If we could just maybe remind ourselves of the outline of the course. Where we've been. Part one was called Epicureanism and its Puzzles, consisted of these first three readings. You know what that means now, what Epicureanism is with regard to death and what the puzzles are. Part two is the meaning of mortality. We looked at Hans Jonas's essay on mortality and then Glenn Gray's idea of death and existentialism. We looked at the idea of mortality rather than death. Part three, we've just gotten through with Plato and Landsberg, really two very strong, I think, proponents of the idea of life after death, which is really the first time we've taken on Epicureanism, as a class, something opposed to Epicureanism, quite important. For whatever your opinion on the matter happens to be, I think it's just quite important in terms of the dialectic, the conversation about death in philosophy. Part four, After Immortality, the Book of Life. That might take, I don't know if I probably did an intro video where I gave you some notion of what I meant by that and why I characterized part four as After Immortality. Hartshorne and Jonas are just really great essays, first of all, and don't need to be put in any particular context to be appreciated. However, in our context, because we do have a context, because we read these things and we've gone through these different problems and we've seen these different points of view, Hartshorne and Jonas sort of fit in, I think, in a particular way. And the way that I'm thinking of it after immortality is that Plato and Landsberg argue for a kind of a full-blown notion of the afterlife. Close the windows. And what I mean by that is that the idea is that death is a transition to a new state of being, and that new state of being is a kind of a fulfillment of earthly life and a transcending of earthly life, but a continuation of life. That is, in one way or another, both of them imagine the human being, partly at least, to have some aspect that continues an active life, whether that is, in Plato's mind, the life of the pure intellect, now for the first time getting the full view of truth, or the Christian view of Landsberg, where the person persists and is fulfilled in some unimaginably deep way in the afterlife by essentially having, I would imagine, an intimacy with God. But when I say full-blown, then I mean really something of us persists and continues to live and experience in some way. I characterized part four as After Immortality because I think that these two authors, these two 20th century authors, really reflect the kind of diminished hopes and diminished expectations of modern writers on the matter, who do believe, on the one hand, that something of us does persist after death, that there's something like eternity for the human being, but that it is not the full-blown, active, experiencing life or afterlife that writers like Plato and Landsberg imagine. For Hartshorne and for Jonas, they do believe, both of them, in one or another version of this idea of the book of life, where there is something in us that persists. There's some reality to the human being that persists forever. And it's a very theological notion, as we'll see. It's very much connected up with God as the only foundation for immortality. But as we'll see, there's something a little bit misleading about Hartshorne mentioning eternal life in his title because it's not life as we would recognize it, in the sense that there's no more, as he's very explicit about, no more experience, no new experiences after death. So a diminished or second best or more moderate notion of immortality, so much so that I think it's fair to say after immortality. Jonas and Hartshorn are both religiously minded philosophers who believe in something like eternity for the human being, but not in the full-blown way that we have just experienced with Landsberg and Plato.